Well, do you know, that's an extremely difficult question because I so love music that I've just thought about that. I'm just going to think of things that happen to occur to me because they're just hundreds of different things. What about, talking as we were about tragedies, what's the most ghastly tragedy that you know? Romeo and Juliet, surely. We've all seen Romeo and Juliet. We've all said, oh, if only. And we've used if only. And if only is the great tragic utterance, isn't it? Oh, if only. And it has a priest at the end, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Father, can't remember his name. So it starts with the Tchaikovsky setting of Romeo and Juliet, ballet Romeo and Juliet, which tells the story as a ballet. It starts, no, it's an overture, isn't it? Symphonic, can't remember what it's called. Anyway, it's Tchaikovsky Romeo and Juliet, which tells the story. Brilliant. And it's this, 2 clarinets and 2 bassoons. And then that's the opening, and then suddenly Tchaikovsky goes into the most imaginative, extraordinary, contorted kind of harmony, which expresses pure anguish. But that's a kind of funereal chant, which takes us right down to the very depths. And, in my view, springs us up as well. Music's no good if it leaves us in the depths. It's got to raise us up. And it's got this wonderful Tchaikovsky chord at the end, called a secondary seventh. And now, one thing you may say to me is, you say secondary seventh. Does it help you like music better to know that's the secondary seventh? Absolutely. It certainly does.
Yeah.
Now, you could say, okay, the people who don't know what these chords are they less well off? Yeah, they are. And part of musical education, introducing people to music, explaining why it's good, is showing them how to enjoy it better. And you can find out how to enjoy it better. I love knowing that that's a secondary seventh, because why should a secondary seventh have a particular effect? It's just called some clever label. But here's another one. Here's a really good example of that, actually. Now, when John Lennon and Paul McCartney wrote that, they knew not a single term of music, except that that's an F major chord, that's some kind of seventh, that's an A major chord. They knew that. But what they had was the genius of the ear and the discerning musical brain, which they had to be able to say, wow, this is good. And they came up with it. And creativity in that way is quite astonishing, because I know they would have been very excited when they wrote that. They would have said, look what I've got. Now, knowing this moment in the Beatles music, which I think is the most complete genius. I was chatting to, do you know Andy Staples? He's a tenor. Andrew Staples, professional tenor, was at Eton. And I said to him, do you know, I would love to meet Paul McCartney, if only to ask him who wrote that chord, the second chord in Yesterday. Because it's the secondary seventh in the relative minor, which instantly causes a modulation. Okay, now that's the And you think, oh, clever clogs. You know, I love it for being that. You know, and I explain it to everybody when I teach. I say, listen to this. It's a secondary seventh in the relative minor. It's the secondary seventh which leads to a modulation in the relative minor. And that's why it's so clever and so good. And every time I hear it, I think, oh, clever people, how wonderful. Andy Staples said to me, I met Paul McCartney last week, and I asked him that very question. I said, what? He said, yes. I said, who wrote the second chord in Yesterday? Was it your manager, George Martin?
Yeah.
Or was it one of you? And Paul McCartney, and I said, what did he say? He said, we'd been writing lots of songs, because of course, you know, they wrote hundreds of songs before any that we know. They wrote loads and loads and rejected them, and then came up with things like She Loves You and From Me to You and things like that, which was suddenly very, very clever indeed. John came in one day and he said, this is Paul McCartney speaking, John came in one day and said, I've met this geezer over the other side of Liverpool who knows sevenths. And we don't do sevenths, we only do on straight chords. And so I'm off to see him. So he got on his bike with his guitar and off he went and saw this geezer that showed him how to write sevenths. So that meant, instead of that, just those, he can then do. Okay, big deal. So what? Muck about with them, play around with them, and you suddenly and you can suddenly do all sorts of nice things if you muck around with sevenths. And they would have played around with them, and then one of them would have been going like this, playing, and then he would have done. Oh! And it's only we coming along afterwards say, oh, that's a secondary seventh, you know, because it's a seventh in a minor. And that's extremely interesting, because there's Paul McCartney and John Lennon, genius writers of music, knowing what should be and what works. And here's someone like me coming along and saying, oh yeah, that's a secondary seventh leading to a modulation into the minor. As far as I'm concerned, they did know what a secondary seventh was. They just hadn't put the language to it. So they hadn't said secondary seventh. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. That's the seventh, you see. And so they did know what it was. So that had gone through, the effect of secondary seventh had gone through their minds, and they'd worked it out. A person listening to it will tap into their pure genius of knowing that sounds combined like that will lead to a lovely effect. And the other aspect of this is that they actually didn't put the word yesterday to it, first of all. They had this tune, dum, da, dum, and you can call that another thing, you can call that a kind of appoggiatura.
Yeah.
They didn't have to know it's called an appoggiatura. Yeah. But they know that it's a note that's not in the chord, resolving to a note which is in the chord. And they knew that. So effectively they did. But I think it wasn't it scrambled eggs? I think they used it. Scrambled eggs, and then somebody thought, right, what's the most poignant 3-syllable word we can think of? What really taps into emotion? So here we are. We've got this. Okay, this is an instrumental piece, no words to it, okay? And this too. Not, but major key, poignant. So there's an instrumental piece which is beautiful, which is a lovely succession of harmonies, really cleverly done. But now if we add to it, yesterday, it makes it overwhelming.